Welcome back. In this video I'm going to show you how I painted the cover of my new flower press. During the first week of May I discovered the YouTube channel Daily Nature Journal and I was inspired to start a nature journal. But not only that, Alex showed some pressed flowers that he was using in his nature journal and I was so interested I decided to order a flower press for myself from Amazon. I plan to keep my flower press for years and eventually hand it down to my daughters as a family heirloom. I chose a flower press from burstuck.co.uk. This flower press is made from plywood, not compressed chipboard, and it has brass bolts, not mild steel, which will eventually rust, but brass does not. You can get the same flower press which I purchased on the link below. The flower press came in a box with instructions and included all the bolts, wing nuts and washers you need. There is a front wooden panel with a flower outline painted on and a plain black panel. You also get the cardboard blotting paper cut to size with chamfered corners. So you make a sandwich of cardboard, blotting paper, flowers, blotting paper, cardboard and repeat. You can have multiple sandwiches in the press and I hope to start pressing flowers soon. So here you see me just laying out how the paper and cardboard would go. You've got the cardboard, then you have a sheet of blotting paper, then you put the flowers, then you add another sheet of blotting paper on top, and then finally another sheet of cardboard. And the idea is that you can stack up different sandwiches of flowers and add more to the press in between. You don't have to press 5 loads in one go. You can come back later and add more. And then finally you would put the front wooden panel on and bolt the whole thing together with the bolts and wing nuts that they provide. But the first thing I want to do is actually paint this front cover panel, and I'm going to be doing it this time with inks. Inks is something new that I've started with. As this was a wooden panel, I just wiped it off with a damp piece of kitchen paper just to get rid of any dust or bits of sawdust that was left behind, just to prep the panel before I started. So here I'm just showing you the swatch I have of the inks, and the 3 colours I'm mainly going to be using is apple green for the leaves. I'll be using canary yellow for the center of the flower and then deep red for the actual the bloom, as it were. I also use a little bit of gold later on too. So what I want to do is not use the ink straight out of the bottle, so I'm just going to take a little bit of the green, and you always need to shake that, and I'm going to put it just in my palette and then add a little bit of water to it to thin it slightly. But I will also be adding a little bit of yellow to mix with the green to give a more olive greeny look, because I don't want to ever use the ink straight out of the bottle. You can see quite there it's really quite a vibrant green, and it's not a realistic green that you generally see in nature. Working with the inks is quite tricky, and I have had a couple of episodes, so I make sure that I put the lids back on as soon as possible. It's amazing how easily these things get knocked over. Anyhow, so I'm pulling out the yellow there and using a separate paintbrush for each color at this stage, just putting a little drop in one of the palettes so that I can just mix the 2 colors together. So I've got the green in the top one and I've got some yellow in the one below it, and then I'm actually going to start thinning it down a little bit with some water in a third well, and mixing the green and the yellow together. This now is the deep red, again shaking the bottle and just putting some of the full strength ink into the little well. Again with a separate paintbrush for each one, which was kind of tricky. I should have used the red paintbrush for the red paint. That would have just made life so much easier. But anyway, so these are the 3 colors that I'm mainly going to be using for this flower. I will be thinning them down and mixing them as well, but you only need a little bit. You really don't need a lot, 2 or 3 drops or so in your little wells. And before we go any further, let me just say that I'm not a professional artist. What I consider myself a hobby artist. I've recently got back into doing art after many years of not doing it, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm sharing my process of learning all of these different mediums and techniques with you. And there are plenty more YouTube channels that will go much more in depth about art techniques and ink techniques than I will. So what I've done now in my little well to the right, I've mixed a little bit of green, a little bit of yellow and a little bit of water, and I've thinned it down. So it tends to look like a sort of olive green, and I've got a very fine brush and I'm just painting some of the leaves just on the one side of the leaf, because I'm going to mix different coloured greens to go on the top side of the leaves as well. So I'm just slowly painting the ink there onto the wood. It's soaking up very well, which was, I suppose I should have expected that. And I'm just choosing some of the lower leaves and painting them in this olive green. I'll just speed it up from now. So I used up all the little ink that I had mixed and painting on these lower leaves. As I used up all of that ink, I then brought in some more green and added some more yellow and mixed it again, and it ends up being a slightly different colour. There I'd added a little bit of red. I didn't like that, so I started again with a fresh well just below. So even though this is a sort of, I'm still mixing just the green and the yellow, it's a sort of olive green, it's a different shade of green to the lower leaf, and I'm now painting out the top leaves with this ink. The idea being that I wanted to make sure that I was mixing colours and not just taking them straight from the bottle, which is really what you don't want to be doing. Just finalising off some of the leaves there and adding, it seems to be a lighter colour on the top part of the leaf, which is how I wanted it to be. So this whole painting, even though I've speeded it up here, it probably took me about an hour to do. I did leave some time for the inks to dry a little bit in between before I moved on to the next stage. The ink was soaking into the wood more than I'd anticipated, and as you're going to see, there were some areas where it actually has bled down the grain of the wood on the very first leaves that I put on. It's very wet, so if you are going to be doing this project, you need to make sure that you're not loading the brush with water. It has to be quite a dry mixture almost as you're putting it onto the wood. And the later leaves and flowers that I drew didn't bleed as much. I'll show you a little bit. Then I took the deep red and I definitely thinned that down because I was wanting to have more of a pinky look to the flowers. Again, a little bit of red, a little bit of water, so you're getting a slightly different color tone here. And then on the one bloom on the top right, I did add a little bit of yellow just to give a more orangey peachy shade to that top bloom. So I made sure to paint each petal separately and finish it off, because the ink does have you do get an edge on the ink, and once it's set, it's set. And when I did a different petal, I was sometimes adding a little bit more red or a little bit more water to the actual mix, so that some of the petals are slightly different, although they're all in the same tone. And then that top petal there where it's folded over, I made that a little bit darker. By the time I got to the petals, I realized that I don't need to be very wet here. You do need to keep it quite dry because it's soaking up, but it's also running through some of the grooves. Then I just brought in some extra yellow on this little sprig of flowers at the bottom, and just put some yellow in there. You can see a little bit, if you look closely, where the green leaf actually bled as the ink ran through the grain of the wood for about 5 millimeters. But once I saw it, I did stop. Next here I've got my little gold paint, because it seems that I put gold paint on everything I ever drew, which I didn't really notice previously. So I'm just adding some gold dots to the center of the flower there, and then a few little of the veins on some of the leaves, just the odd one here and there. I'm just putting a little bit of gold. It's just going to add a little bit of shimmer just on some of the little selected leaves. I also added a little bit of gold to the sprig in the bottom left, and just to add a little bit of gold shimmer there. I've noticed when you're working with the metallic inks, you really got to mix it, because there seems to be little particles that actually float in the ink, and you want to make sure that they are in suspension as you're laying it down. I started to draw a few fine lines on the petals just to add a little bit of interest to this flower and give it a little bit of shine, I suppose. It just seems to be a nice thing to do. Now, if you decide to paint your flower press, of course you can do your bloom in any colour you like, yellow, orange or pink or whatever. I just like the idea of doing red because I had the red ink, and of course the green of the leaves. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But by bringing in some gold trim, I could have done silver here if I'd have done a blue flower. I think there's many ways that this can be done so that each flower press will be individual to you. So here's the finished cover. I'm going to let it dry quite a bit. I may put a varnish on later. I'll give it a day to dry thoroughly, and then I'll start looking at doing some pressed flowers. I'm Alison Hazel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.